Hello, welcome to the 2023 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Tiffany Hayes from the South Carolina State Library, and I will be your host for this session. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat or to interact with other attendees and the speaker within the Whova app for this presentation. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter today. We have Jennie Garner here from the North Liberty Library in Iowa, and she's going to be talking about the policies of yes. And thank you so much for presenting today, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Well, good afternoon. My name is, as Tiffany said, Jennie Garner. I am the director at the North Liberty Library in Iowa. So we're on the east side of the state. I have been the library director there for just about 9 years. I have a staff of 19. 10 of them are full-time, 9 are part-time. I have been at the library for 25 years. Actually, it's my only library, but I like to tell people that I've actually worked in 3 libraries because our first library that I worked in was just next door to my house. I went over to borrow a book, and my director was great at recruiting volunteers, and she got me started. Shortly after that, I went back to graduate school and has started that career path, that trajectory. We moved from a 1,200 square foot library in 1997 to a building that is, let's see, 6,300 square feet. We share a building that's a multi-use facility. So we get a lot of traffic. We have a recreation department next door to us in the same building. We share an entrance with them and in the middle of the hallway. And then we have communications department that does great work for us and helps us. And we have a before and after school program and 2 pools in our building. So we have a lot going on. There's a 600 person conference center in the basement of the rec side. And then we also both have meeting rooms that we try really hard to partner and collaborate to make sure that everyone is accommodated. So that's just a little bit of background. So that our building is now expanded in 2014 when I became director. We were just finishing our renovation and we are in a space that's almost 18,000 square feet. So when I was hired as director, one of my goals, my big goals, was that I wanted to create a service model. I'd had a lot of time to think about it. I had served as youth and teen librarian, library assistant, and then assistant director, / teen librarian for a little bit, and then assistant director when they made me give up my teen stuff, and finally as director. And I knew that I wanted to do things a little bit differently. We had to have a wonderful library, and it's always been so, but I wanted people to create a service model that would allow our staff to help our patrons each time they walk through our doors experience whatever they're seeking, whether they're visiting to get a book for their next read, they're attending a program, filing for unemployment, or looking for a job online. Our customer service starts with our policies. Strong policy and a positive work culture flow into the library just naturally to create a wonderful environment of inclusivity. So having strong policies and consistent training in place has allowed us a lot of latitude in our community to serve people the way we wanted it designed, and taking a lot of cues from our community in that work. As we all know, we've had a bit going on in the last few years, starting in 2020 with the pandemic, and then some social injustices when George Floyd was murdered in the United States. And in Iowa, during that same time, in August of 2020, we had a derecho sweep through our communities across the state with winds of over 100 miles per hour, destroying thousands of trees and homes, taking out utilities in many of our communities. And having those strong policies in our library in North Liberty allowed us to act with resilience and to provide a framework that ensured that our staff felt cared for during that entire time, a time of great turmoil. So as administrator, it's not only one of my goals, but also a passion that we are sure to continually develop our policies in a useful way that becomes service to our staff and to our patrons at the same time, our public. So our staff is trained to use policy to provide service in the moment. I tell our staff members and team all the time that we don't know what people are carrying when they walk through our doors. When they come in the library, we might be the only good interaction they have in the day, right? So this passion extends to libraries nationwide. I really love libraries in our country, and I think we do so many amazing things. As current president of the Association for Rural and Small Libraries, my big lofty goal for this year is that we find a way for all libraries, big and small, to create messaging across the United States about what we do today. It's no longer about being a place for books, just for books, but about literacy and beyond. That messaging is so important, and we aren't doing that very well. We don't market ourselves as well as we could. So getting started, Merriam-Webster defines policy as a course or a method to action to guide us in determining the present and the future decisions. So I want to point out in that definition that there is no mention of the past. Our libraries and our policies serve us when they are refreshed regularly, when they are proactive rather than reactive, when they are positive rather than punitive. Even the titles of our policies matter. Who is it that our titles are serving? What does the title say about your library and your services? If it is it in terms that are relatable to our people that come in through the doors and understandable to our patrons? Good policy is crafted to allow fluidity and flexibility and not box us in with minutia and rigid rules. I would encourage each of you to view policies as a living continuum as we talk about how we get to yes. Our staff is empowered to make decisions that allow them to provide the most positive outcomes for our patrons each time, and they are trained to deliver that service with compassion and empathy and have empathetic conversations. So let's talk a little bit about the journey. We are still on that journey. It is not ending anytime soon. It's going to be ongoing. A side note before we get started, I will tell you that I am not a huge fan of long, wordy slides. So my slide deck is basically something to give you to look at while you're listening to my talking head. I want to invite each of you to share this journey with me, a journey that started with a small discussion between me and a couple of my coworkers, fleshing out how we as a team thought that we might approach working toward neutral and inclusive policy building. It wasn't just that it wasn't something we were doing conscientiously. We do work really hard to make our policies very, very flexible and to make them accessible to everyone, but we weren't consciously adding that bit about inclusion. It just wasn't something that we'd been doing. So quickly, it became clear to us that we had a lot of work to do if we wanted to intentionally frame our library as a space that organically allows people to feel they belong. We were asking ourselves these questions. How might we find that middle ground to create policy that helps us work with the diverse populations that we serve in our public libraries? How do we focus our work on equity and inclusion? It is vital that we continually review and update through that equity and inclusion lens to strike a balance that keeps our patrons and our staff welfare in mind and providing the best possible service. So let's talk a little about the people that we serve. In our communities, especially if we're small and rural, we often assume that we know all of our patrons. We do know many of them, but we can't always know what goes on behind closed doors or the struggles people face in their lives and in their own heads. So I would challenge you all to think about your communities just a little bit, and you don't have to put anything in the chat. You can if you want, but how many of you serve people in your communities who you believe might be struggling with addiction? How many of you serve people who may be experiencing domestic violence at home or food insecurity? How many of you serve people of color? That's one that is visible, but there are many, many other things that our patrons are experiencing that are not visible to the eye. So if you'll play along with me, I'm going to take you just a few minutes to delve into the stories about these young people you see on the screen. Please go ahead and add in the chat what you believe to be their stories, and we'll go around this as we go around the slide. We'll start in the upper corner with that smiling young person in the pink shirt, and I'm going to just like pause briefly in this recording, I know, to give you guys a chance to put a few things in the chat and tell me their story. What is the story of the young person in the pink shirt? So this is Ellie, formerly Mason. Ellie identifies as they, them. Ellie has an extremely supportive family. When Ellie's mom, sorry, I'm still saying his, when their mom called the library about a year and a half ago to let us know that Ellie was adopting new pronouns, we were very, very gratified that she trusted us to be a welcoming and safe place for Ellie to visit. She wanted us to continue a positive relationship that was already established when Ellie used to volunteer. And we work really hard with them to ensure that they feel comfortable in our space. I did contact Ellie to ask if I could include them on this slide, and the answer was, that'd be cool. So we'll go counterclockwise. The person below Ellie in the navy shirt with the sunglasses, who is this young man? And again, I'll just pause briefly. So I'd like to introduce you to James. James is a friend of my son. He spent a lot of nights at our house growing up because his mom often left him alone as an elementary kid when she went on long weekends to Chicago. It wasn't that she didn't care for him. She just didn't have the capacity to not go home to her family, and he wanted to be here. He didn't want to miss school. So he would come to our house, and in the morning, sometimes I'd wake up to go downstairs and drag my son out of bed to find James ironing his clothes. He's always been sort of like that. But despite his odds and his upbringing, today James is a police officer in a local community near us. And he just came out recently in the last few years as gay. So being a gay Black police officer can be pretty challenging today, as you are, I'm sure you're all very aware. James is bright and he has a huge smile, and we love him. So we'll go on to the next person. Who are these young women, these beautiful young women in the corner? What do you think their story is? So I'll tell you that these are two friends of my daughter's. They are both hairdressers in a salon, a local salon. Jaylyn, the one in the blue, owns the salon, and Jess in the red works with her. We'll start with Jess. Jess is always got a smile on her face, but when she was 4 years old, she almost died from fire that burnt about over much of her body, first-degree burns across her body. Today, she's unafraid to show her scars. She often wears half shirts or tank tops, and she doesn't hide them, which is not always that common. She lets kids touch her scars. The first time I met her, she was allowing some young kiddos to feel her scars and talk to them about fire safety. And every year she raises money for a burn camp that she attends as a counselor during the summer. Jess does smile all the time, but behind her smile and those scars lurks a lot of unseen pain. She has a lot of physical pain and emotional pain. And then Jaylyn. Jaylyn is like my daughter. She, in the blue, she owns that salon, and she is an absolute joy to be around. She grew up with my kids like siblings. And almost a year ago now, she lost her father, good friend of mine's husband. She dressed like she came out of the 1960s, and she has her own style. And throughout it all, she struggles with depression and anxiety and has some pretty concerning addictive things with alcohol and other substances. So again, those are not visible to us, but as you've met these people, you see that they aren't what's on the surface. Let's go up to that top corner, that young man in that suit, that handsome young guy. What do you think his story is? So this is my son. His name is Nick. Nick is married today. He's almost 30. He owns his own house, and he's an electrician. He's recently finished his apprenticeship, and is a journeyman. Nick is also a former felon. We had some struggles when he was a teenager. He had a lot of issues. his main issues stem around pot and marijuana. He dealt during his teen years. I didn't know about it. We knew he was struggling, but it's hard as a parent to know always what to do. So we not only have kiddos like Nick in our community and adults who have returned from prison, but we also have parents who are struggling and need help. So let's create spaces for people like Nick and James and Ellie and Jalen and Jess. That's our goal. Our goal is to serve these folks in absolutely the best way we can. It's not only vital to our well-being, but to theirs. As a community, we can help them succeed, and in return, our community and our library are successful. So now let's move on to my confession. My confession is that as a library professional, I operated for years and years believing that libraries were just naturally inclusive in the work we do. And in many ways we are, but what we do is often just skimming the surface. So I'll talk a little bit about myself just so you know my background and where I come from. I was raised in rural Iowa in a small town right in the middle of the United States. My parents, who were extremely loving and nurturing. My mom was worked at a deputy sheriff as a dispatcher in the sheriff's office for many years, and then became a minority counselor. That was her title at the local college. So in our home, we welcomed people from all over the world and from almost every race, religion, and ethnicity. A lot of nights. People were always coming and going. And in addition, we housed foster children. So I have a lot of foster brothers and sisters out there who are some successful and some not so much. And my mom also was a counselor for 42 Saudi Arabian men who came to learn English in our country. And I had 42 brothers after that. So it's been a wonderful journey for me. But I should tell you that despite those things, I thought that I didn't have any biases. It turns out I do. Most people do. So acknowledging our biases and acknowledging that we can work through those things is really important in this work. And before we move on, I just want to mention to you that there's a couple of clashing characteristics. I blame it on being the youngest child in my family. I love policy. I love building policy and creating that. It's kind of a geek thing for me, but I also am a bit of a rule bender, probably from being that youngest child again. So moving on. Let's talk a little bit about North Liberty as a community. Our community is today about 22,000 people is the estimate. We are rapidly growing. When we moved here in 1991, we had about 4,500 people in our community, so it's burgeoning. It's been a little bit hard to keep up with it with services in our city. We do pretty well, but it's been a struggle at points. We're situated between Cedar Rapids, which is mostly middle class and a lot of trade industry workers, and then Iowa City, which is more of an middle upper class and academic community, I would say. And in our community, we have two school districts, the Iowa City Community School District and the Clear Creek Amana School District. Clear Creek is more of a rural community district, and Iowa City is suburban, so it's a little interesting. And then we have a private K through 8 school. I believe they're building the high school shortly as well. So we have a little bit more exclusive school too. So we have patrons coming from all different backgrounds and from many, many different communities around us. It's a pretty mobile area. We are right on Interstate 80 and 380, so it's a pretty mobile community, and lots of patrons who come to use most of our, out of all of our libraries. I think we have 6 in the county. They come and see all of us, although all of our libraries are standalone. We do quite a few partnerships too. So let's talk about the history and evolution at the library. Historically, our policies were pretty inconsistent, actually. When I started reviewing them, when I became director, I noticed a lot of inconsistency. I noticed some reactive policies and more rigid and punitive policies than I had really realized were there, looking at them with fresh eyes as a director. So we started looking at those policies right away and shifting them to make them more consistent and logical. We added a purpose statement to each of our policies. We removed our procedures and put them where they belong, which is in our training and onboarding manuals. And our policies have become, thanks to that, much more flexible and proactive. We combined several policies and we got rid of some really silly policies that were still in existence when I started as director, like our cell phone use policy. No longer there. We don't talk about that. We have those things in our conduct policy. So now we're going back and filling in the gaps by adding this commitment to inclusivity and belonging. While we haven't had the opportunity to really actively recruit folks in our small community to work in our library, our staff really does in many ways reflect our community, and that's been another goal as part of this inclusivity process. Most of our staff appear to be straight, white, and neurotypical, but in fact, we have staff who are we have staff of color, we have LGBTQ plus staff, we have neurodivergent staff, we have some staff who live with mental disorders, and we try really hard to make our staff also reflective in their titles. Since I started as director, we have shifted some of our positions to include a position called family services. We have a very young community, so we have a lot of patrons and families with young kids. So we have what we call a family services position that Emily, who is in that position, serves our community in the 0 to 5 age category, and then multi-generational or family programming. And then we have youth services, of course, a couple of youth services staff, and public services is a newer position. Also, that position looks at how we are our front-facing side of things and what we can do to improve that every day, that service model. So the impact that we have on our communities in our respective corners of the world is really positions libraries to perfectly align with being allies to the underserved, the disenfranchised in our communities. The very fact that people can walk through our doors and receive free service without really much in paperwork, even library cards aside from some of us, they can walk in and do almost anything that they need to do in the library without much interference. They are not asked where they come from. They are not asked why they're there. This builds a foundation for libraries to take on a role of allyship and working with the disempowered members of our communities. So this is our inclusion commitment. I just added this slide in because I don't typically read slides, but I do want to read this one because I think it's really important. It's actually still in draft form. It has not been approved by our IDEA committee. It's something that we worked on and haven't moved forward with yet, but I'll show you a little bit later that I have something that I've included in your materials that shows that we do have an inclusivity statement that's been brought forth by our library board, actually. But this is this commitment. At the North Liberty Library, we commit to treating every individual with dignity and respect. We strive to create a safe and inviting environment where inclusion and belonging are a natural part of the culture. These values are reflected in our policies and in our service. So for example, one of those things was that we wanted to include a statement in our meeting room policy that disallowed the use of our meeting rooms by any group that would discriminate against other people. Our city attorney told us we couldn't do that, but he did help us draft craft a statement that we could use, and I'll show you that really quickly here. Let me pull it up, sorry. So this statement, the North Liberty Library does not discriminate or condone discrimination against any person, et cetera, you'll see the list. Granting permission to use our meeting rooms does not constitute endorsement of any groups or affiliate groups' viewpoints. Iowa civil rights law forbids discrimination on the basis of, and again, the list. This is really important for us. We wanted to make sure people knew that we didn't condone that type of discrimination. So I just wanted to bring that up and show it to you, and I'll go back to our slideshow. and we'll move on. Our inclusion commitment came about as part of this whole process that we've been working on, and it's still in draft form. So again, like I said, we're just still working through it, but we are doing other things to show that commitment to inclusion, and I'll talk a little bit about those here. So we started a group called the Idea Committee to set the stage for sustaining this work and to continually review our processes. Initially, we called this group the Jedi Committee, and the J stood for justice. Who doesn't want to be a Jedi? But in all seriousness, the group took ownership right away. I really wanted to be a part of that group, but I stepped back as administrator and asked the staff to do this work because I wanted them to feel immersed in it. So we have 7 staff members who volunteered to be a part of that committee. And we also have our city's newly hired outreach and equity coordinator. I'm very excited that we have this position. It's under the communications department, and they work very closely with us on these things. So the group really took ownership, and with that came the name change to IDEA. They said, no, we don't want to be a Jedi committee. We want to be an IDEA committee. The A stands for access, which we think is all important and all encompassing. So I'm just going to define what we mean in our library. This is how we define these terms. Diversity is defined for our purposes as the range of human differences. So race, gender, ethnicity. Equity we define as fairness and justice, the way people are treated and served. Inclusion we define as creating a welcoming environment of belonging. And accessibility is defined for us as decisions about our operations and services that improve patron experience to make it available to all. So that said, diversity for us skims the surface. It gets things started. Inclusion and belonging takes us on a little bit of a deeper dive. This analogy is one that I really like. In essence, diversity is being given a plate of food. Inclusion is being given a chance to choose what goes on your plate, and belonging is getting to help create the menu. So in our practice, our focus is primarily on representing everyone in storytime, in programming, in our displays, and expanding beyond that token diversity to a deeper level. We work with community partners to reach underserved populations, and we seek out bridge contacts in our communities to help us understand what programming needs are and what wants are from our community, and acknowledge that there are barriers that exist. That's a big factor, is just acknowledging that the barriers are there and our own ignorance of those barriers. And then we commit to reaching out to those underserved communities to invite them to belong. Our policies are words and the structure for our service model. Our procedures are the actionable things that we use to deliver our services. So in thinking about your own library, are your policies equitable and consistent? Are your services equitable and consistent? And are they consistent with other policies in your library? That's a big thing. We had policies literally that counteracted each other. So we really took a good look at those and tried to make them very consistent across the board. And finally, I can't express this strongly enough. Our policies are only as good as our staff training. So behind the scenes, we provide really consistent onboarding and ongoing training about our policies and through our procedures. We script out things. They don't have to use our scripts. We just give them as examples, so that when they're delivering service, they need to answer a question, they can turn to those things to help them. We do role playing at our staff meetings and trainings at all of our staff meetings, and we do policy review very regularly. A little bit about the pictures there. I mean, the top one just for fun. The other picture, the Let Love Fly, is our mayor holding up a thing that they wrote to just add to that inclusion. And we love this. This was an event that we had the first time last year, an event that celebrates LGBTQ plus in our community. And there were about 500, 600 people at that event. So we were really pleased to see the turnout. And I think it'll just continue to grow. So these are just a few of our policies. Actually, we don't have a conduct policy. Well, we do have a conduct policy, but we've tried really hard to make it extremely flexible and extremely positive in the way it's worded. We also have a child safety policy, the disruptive behavior flow chart, and an importance, and it's just important to have that consistency in training. I'm going to pull up the flow chart if I can grab it real quick just to show you guys what that looks like. This was part of our change in our model of service. We wanted to make sure that all patrons were treated fairly, and I don't know that I can grab it right now. I'm so sorry. I will make sure it's shared with you guys in the resources page. I'm sorry, I did not have that ready to go. So we'll just jump on here. So inclusion and belonging in action. We have just recently added to our strategic plan, and everything about our strategic plan centers on diversity, inclusion, and equity and access. Every piece of it was looked at thoroughly to make sure that that's the case. Creating inclusive environments is difficult and it can be challenging, but it takes a lot of courage. Actually, it forces us to embrace things that are different from us, and sometimes it challenges our beliefs and requires a fundamental change in how we're delivering service and what we say, but continually also assessing and adjusting. So our strategic plan is a fluid model for us to live by at the library, something that we use every day. We've really tried to embed it in our work and make sure that we are continually looking at it and adjusting it as we need to. That's also included in those resources for you guys. Library policies are generally affected by any change you have in your service priorities. So long range planning, strategic planning, it's really imperative that our library policies are kept current and following that regular review schedule that I talked about. Our policies undergo a schedule of being reviewed every year. Every single one of our policies are reviewed by all staff members, full and part-time, and by our board on an annual basis. And we really take into account our frontline staff and the work they're doing. And then our idea committee takes another look at them every time to make sure that they are using inclusive language and that they account for the diverse needs in our community and the changing needs in our community. Of course, our policies need to align with the needs, interests, and priorities of our community, both the residents and their values and mission of our library. And of the larger entities, right? We don't just serve our community, but we serve under larger entities. So our city and our funding bodies are also considered in everything we do. I want to emphasize to all that local decision-making is always important. What works in my community in Iowa may not work in everyone's communities. I've worked really hard over the years to cultivate a trusting relationship with our city leaders and with our library board. And that's given me a lot of leeway to do this work. It doesn't happen overnight. I sometimes before I do anything, I check with some of our city leaders to make sure that they're on board. But for the most part, I've been given a lot of autonomy to continue in this. And by putting our policies through that regular review process, we also keep our staff and our board knowledgeable about the policies, and it ensures that the changes we've made are reflected when we provide services and in our operations. I'll talk a little bit about the account reconciliation too. We went fine-free in March of 2020, so boom. We didn't have a lot of chance to advertise it before things changed for us rapidly. We are still fine-free, but we've done a little bit of shifting actually even now. And that is that we do provide an account reconciliation plan. So if someone comes in and they have failed to return a lot of library materials or have a large quantity of replacement costs applied on their account, we take a look at that and first kind of just discern if we can actually just erase those. We kind of consider some of that the cost of doing business. If there are a lot of new materials or we feel that We need to try to get replacement costs covered for those. We sit down with the patron and we work through a reconciliation agreement. We ask them what they think they can afford on a monthly basis. And even if that's $2 a month, that's fine. We have them sign an agreement. It's not a contract, it's just an agreement with us. And as long as they continue to make those payments each month, they have all the services open to them. We do not, in fact, do anything on as far as like technology. Anything in-house is available to us, to patrons all of the time, and any of our electronic collections. The only thing that may, if they can't follow the account reconciliation plan, we sometimes limit the number of items they can check out at a time, but we don't want to create any barriers to access to people. We want to make sure that we're meeting people where they are in all of our policies, and we want to allow that access. That's the most important part of what we do. So we want our policies to reflect best practices and professional library standards as well, and looking at not only current library users, but our invisible members in our communities and who our potential users might be someday. That's that proactive piece. So the latest things we're doing right now, it includes developing a programming policy. We do not currently have a programming policy. So we're working through that right now. We want to make sure that we're prepared and that a policy is in place to protect our staff, depending on the outside the box thinking that they decide to do. So it can be really difficult to find those underlying people in our communities that maybe are not being served. We do call them our invisible patrons. We know from the last years that the social climate and the shift in our populations have impacted the development of our policies and our services as well. So we just can, it's all an ongoing-ish thing that we do. It's continued all the time. The United Action for Youth is listed here. They are an amazing organization out of Iowa City, which is a neighboring community for us. They have come in, they are magical. They have helped train our full staff team on a number of occasions in delivering services to youth and developing those relationships with the youth in our communities. And also helped us work through some issues with adults who thought that the youth were a little bit wild in our library. We are not a quiet library, but we had to work through some things on both sides of the fence to get everybody on board for how we're delivering services. So they helped a lot with that. Our social work interns, we've had for about 3 years or 4 years, I guess now. We're on our 4th set. We have 2 interns currently working in the library who are doing social work. One of them is providing training they'll be providing a little bit of training to us. They'll also be looking for grants to help us address some food insecurities and get a refrigerator in the library. The other one is working on helping us build a tracking system to track when we assist patrons with social services and community, navigating community resources. So those are both really important things. We've had in the past social work interns do things like help us develop a plan to create a youth council. We have a teen advocate group, but the youth council is a little bit different. It's a citywide initiative that's been taken on by our outreach and equity coordinator with the city. And it's a really great, diverse group of young teens in our community. And then we have United Action for Youth also is partnering with us on a mural. This is our latest thing. We just got a grant to do a mural with, we have put out a call for a muralist to work with some of our local teens to create an inclusive mural that reflects the youth in our community. And we're very excited about that. It's going to be a moving mural, so it won't be stuck in one place. We can move it around the community as we want. That's just getting started. And then diversity audits, we'll talk a little bit about that. So we started diversity audits. That was one gift of COVID, I guess, was that we had some time to do this. So all of our entire youth and teen collections have been completed and ongoing as we bring in new books. Every book goes through the diversity audit process, and we're just moving into doing the adult area. So just going along with all of this, all of our staff is immersed in this work. And when our staff follows policy in delivering service and knows how to use policy, our organization becomes more credible. We aren't randomly making decisions without merit or basis. And to take it just a step further, by giving space for our citizens to develop habits of lifelong learning in our communities and to read freely, we create an educated community of youth and a workforce. It makes our library sustainable and valued, and that in turn sustains our community. So I'm going to show you a recent poster that was created by one of our staff. Our marketing team made this wonderful poster. Why did that not work? Darn it. Oh, there it came. It just took a minute. All right. I hope you can see it. So this poster was created to help with our inclusion. It's posted in a couple places in our library. It's big on the walls. So just talking about the freedom to read, equality, diversity, equity, all the things that we stand for. We know that also going on right now across the United States is a lot of challenging times for librarians dealing with book challenges. While I don't openly bring up much, I try really hard to train our city leaders, including our council, on these things that are coming up, knowing that their knowledge, them having this knowledge and ammunition, means that they're going to back me if this ever comes to our community. We're very fortunate that it hasn't happened here yet. We know that books are exactly what you see on the screen, windows and mirrors and those sliding glass doors to our community. And we want every patron who comes in to see themselves reflected in some piece of our library. But while our policies are neutral, I will say that we don't at our library believe that public libraries can be neutral. Social justice lies in the realm of responsibility for libraries as one of the last free public spaces. To circle back to the title of this presentation, the idea behind the policies of yes comes from the Shonda Rhimes book, Year of Yes. The idea that saying yes can be really affirming, both to us as librarians and to our patrons. This quote from her book really stood out for us. The very act of saying yes is not only life-changing, but can be life-saving. Our staff is trained to find ways to say yes to our patrons every day. That doesn't mean that they're always delivering the service. That doesn't mean that everyone gets exactly what they want when they come in. Our hope is to connect them to what they want and need, whether it's finding ways for us to get them to the place they're seeking, right? So it might be a yes, and we're going to do this for you. We can connect you with these people or this organization that can help you, and making that bridge, being that bridge for them. So that's our goal, to help them in one way or another, whatever that might be. And how are we flexible in meeting our patrons' needs and giving our patrons what experience they want every time they walk through our doors? As I was doing the research on this topic, I really became interested. One of the things I really became interested in, as you probably know, based on my son's past, is the incarceration and the service to incarcerated and returning citizens. And as I was reading about it, this idea came to me about how can we as libraries be ally organizations to our community. When I was looking for things on the concept of an ally organization, what I found was a lot of definitions about allyship that were almost all having to do with individuals allying with groups, or groups that are disenfranchised. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with the concept of libraries being ally organizations, but I didn't find it out there. So libraries are so well positioned to take on roles of ally work in our communities. We help individuals who need a voice and who need access to services that we provide and services in our communities. We're already doing these things. Almost all of us are doing these things, and now it's time for us to speak up and take it a step further, to go beyond that policy writing to being inclusive and interrupting our systems, to becoming a place where we serve our community and our community looks to us as that leader. And ally work creates a space for belonging where people find themselves and are given glimpses of the world beyond our borders. So in my normal slide presentation, I would give you time for discussion and question and answer. I'm not sure that's going to happen right now, but hopefully I'll be in the room. So I'll be answering the questions as we go. A little bit more about me. Here's a glimpse of my family, my son and his beautiful wife and our daughter and my husband. And this is just my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me on Gmail if you like. Also, my LinkedIn profile is here. I also have a Twitter, but it's pretty personal. It's kind of my passion place, so I'm not sure it's recommended for everyone. And then just some resources that I've included that you'll find when you look through the slides here. And that is all that I have for you today. I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennie. We
Hope that was
appreciate
okay.
you being here today, and thank you everyone who has attended. I hope you enjoy all of your sessions. And if you have any questions, you can still interact with the presenters through the app or contact through their contact information. And there will be an evaluation provided. So let us know what you think. Have a great afternoon.